Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizenhausen. Today, November 3rd, there are a lot of interesting news stories. Ukrainian drones precisely struck an important factory in Russia and shut it down. Dictator Maduro may be about to lose power, and Donald Trump is moving F-35s and Reaper drones to Venezuela. Britain has delivered a new batch of Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. And as for Turkey and China, they are nevertheless turning away from Russian oil. And Western oil giants have suddenly made one important discovery for themselves. The more strikes against Russia, the more profitable it is for them. And Dmitry Medvedev is once again threatening the United States. This time, he decided to hit the United States, where it hurts the most. Meanwhile, Ukraine is methodically dismantling the Russian oil empire brick by brick. This and more will be covered in today's episode. There's a lot of interesting stuff ahead. If you're new to this channel, subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. On Monday night, Ukrainian forces attacked the Saratov region with drones. Even Russian Telegram channels are reporting on this. It seems that censorship is getting harder and harder for them now. Before, it wasn't an explosion, just a bang, a bit of smoke, but they always said nothing was hit, everything was shot down. But now they're even talking about explosions. So, last night, the Saratov oil refinery, which belongs to the Rosneft corporation, was hit. It has a capacity of 7 million tons per year. So, for example, Donald Trump imposes sanctions against two Russian oil giants, Rosneft and Lukoil. But the small ones, though proud, Ukrainian drones are imposing their own direct action sanctions right on these plants. Just to make sure, these are the kinds of sanctions that are almost impossible to get around now. It's impossible. This plant has already been attacked, has had to stop processing several times, so apparently they've patched it up a little. They used every spare part they could find and did some repairs. But then Ukrainian drones came again and sent their fiery regards. I'm going to show you a video now, but before that I wanted to say this. An oil refinery, especially a large one, is a massive facility. It can be as big as a small town. Hundreds or even thousands of people can work there. But every refinery has its Achilles heel. That's the primary oil processing unit. It's called the LOAVT. If it goes out of order, the entire refinery just shuts down. That is, initially all the crude oil goes to this primary processing unit. Then the oil is separated into different fractions. The gas fraction, which includes propane and butane. The light fraction is gasoline, the middle one is diesel and kerosene, and the heavy fraction is fuel oil and bitumen. After that, each of these fractions goes its own way for further processing. So this unit is basically just the starting point of the refinery's operation. If the primary processing doesn't work, the entire plant is useless. And now I'll show you a video of how a Ukrainian drone precisely crashes into this very unit. At the Saratov refinery last night. Take a look at this video. The Russians have already started building protections out of nets and various metal structures. But just imagine for a second if it hadn't been a drone that hit this unit, but a missile. In that case, there would be nothing left to restore, and no net would have saved it. And the Russians can't quickly replace this equipment. They've used up all the spare parts. Let me remind you, there are only 30 of these main refineries in Russia. So, if you take out these 30 refineries, that's it. The entire Russian refining industry is finished. Another Achilles heel in Russia's shadow industry is its port infrastructure. All of this is processed, and if it's meant for export, it gets sent and accumulates in one place, where it's loaded onto tankers. Just yesterday, an oil terminal in the port of Tuapse was successfully attacked. I believe this is the first time this terminal has been attacked during the entire war. This was a clear signal. There's actually more of a political message behind the attack, although quite a lot burned there. Everything, and I think the damage is such that it won't be restored anytime soon. But the political signal is much stronger to all those eager to help Putin circumvent sanctions. You shouldn't do that. Your tankers could accidentally catch fire in a Russian port because there is a war going on. And that was a very clear signal. By the way, one of the Shadow Fleet's tankers caught fire there. And speaking of war, there's another war that could break out soon. US President Donald Trump doubts the possibility of war with Venezuela, but believes that Nicolas Maduro's days as head of Venezuela are numbered. The US continues, I remind you, to strike at ships suspected of smuggling prohibited substances. And when asked about the likelihood of military action, Trump replied, "I doubt it." Well, now for sure, as they say, Maduro, you better hide in the wheat fields. If Trump says, no, no, we won't strike, you can be sure he will, and it won't be pretty. However, Trump's actions themselves say a little something. Actually, I would say not just a little, but quite the opposite. That is when Trump says, I don't think military action is possible. Since September, U.S. Army units have been redeployed to the Caribbean region, mainly to San Juan, as well as to the Guantanamo base. Several warships, F-35 fighter jets, MQ-9 Reaper combat drones, in short, everything necessary is being deployed. If I were Maduro, I would already be packing my bags, buying a ticket to the Moscow suburbs to see Putin, and flying there where the others are living. Fugitive dictators. Let me just remind you, here's a typical example. We won't strike, and in fact we're giving time. In the summer of this year, Donald Trump gave Iran 2 weeks for diplomacy, and just a few days later, Iran was struck. Its nuclear facilities were hit. By the way, this is one of Donald Trump's favorite tactics, which he has described many times in his books or mentioned in various interviews. That is to give some time, like think it over, and then strike, to show that you are absolutely uncompromising and ready to escalate. Well, go ahead, I'm ready. Are you ready, Maduro? I don't think so. And here, if we add another one of Donald Trump's favorite tactics, he always emphasizes that no one knows what's on his mind, what he'll do next. Maybe, in fact, that's actually true. Maybe he himself doesn't always know. All in all, Maduro, well, taken together, it looks pretty grim for Maduro. Maduro, who in the US faces accusations of protecting drug trafficking, trading in illegal substances, and using facilities, including airfields and ports, for shipping these illegal substances. So basically, Maduro says, I'm not guilty of anything, I don't transport anything at all. I'm just here, you know? I'm not doing anything wrong, you just want to seize our Venezuelan oil. Lately, Maduro has been throwing real tantrums. He records strange addresses to Donald Trump, shouts no war in his own version of English, waves a stick in front of the military, who for some reason are kneeling before him, and in general, immediately wrote letters to practically the entire club of dictators. He wrote to Russia saying, help, hooligans are depriving me of my sight. Then he wrote to Iran, then to China. He wrote to everyone, at least to those we know about. And from Russia, they even brought him something. Just the other day, an IL-76 military transport plane landed in Caracas. This is the same plane that was involved in delivering cargo for the Russian PMC Wagner. Well, yeah. In mid-September, Caracas is holding military exercises called Caribbean Sovereignty 200. There were several ships involved. Why 200? I couldn't find out. You know, I'm a level 80 nitpicker. Why did you call it Caribbean Sovereignty 200? Well, I know what Cargo 200 means, but that's a bad name for Maduro's exercises. In general, it's a textbook story of the Venezuelan dictator. I specifically included this fragment. It's literally just a few sentences. I looked up the story of how an ordinary director of a bus driver in Caracas suddenly became a dictator and derailed an entire country. So, at one time, Maduro used to drive people around Caracas in an old blue bus, then he joined the union. Later, he ended up in Hugo Chavez's inner circle. He was very active, very loud. Well, he's still like that, by the way. Chavez saw in him a loyal guy without ambition, like a loyal dog, who would do anything. At first, he was assigned diplomatic missions, then made a minister, and at the end of his life, Chavez made him vice president. And when Hugo Chavez died, Maduro found himself at the helm and realized something. At first, he promised there would be democracy and a change of power, but he quickly understood that you can't give up power to anyone. Then comes the classic playbook of any dictator. Rigged elections, parliament under control, courts under control. The opposition is thrown in jail, the economy collapses, sanctions are imposed, oil stops saving the country, millions of Venezuelans flee, but Maduro himself remains. That is, he essentially sacrificed the entire country and its population in order to remain in power. Here is the driver and the alarm bus. By the way, doesn't this remind you of another story about another dictator? a gray inconspicuous apparatus operator. As a KGB clerk, he carried suitcases for the mayor of St. Petersburg, Sobchak. So when he was essentially brought to power, just like Maduro was brought in by Chavez, when Putin was brought to power and Yeltsin was told, "It's time for you to go, let's bring this one in," Putin even talked about some seemingly reasonable things. And the most interesting thing is that to those Russian oligarchs who brought him to power, he seemed obedient, predictable, loyal. A guy without ambitions, as Chavez called Maduro. But then, when Putin got a taste of power, he either brought those who put him in power under his control or crushed them. In other words, those who didn't want to submit, he crushed. He rewrote the constitution for endless rule and essentially cemented power in Russia for himself. But now, on top of that, he started a war with Ukraine, meaning that this Botox-addled jellyfish who's lost his mind also has nuclear missiles. So much for the humble bag carrier behind the mayor. The bag is being carried, and now, by the way, behind Putin too. They carried the little suitcase, but now with a slightly different content. By the way, friends, let me remind you, we are currently running an important fundraiser for the armed forces of Ukraine for the 1st Medical Battalion for our fighters. The medics have a critical need for portable ventilators. These portable devices often break down for them. Right now they need 8 units, but for now we're raising money for one, and then we'll go for another. This is a Falco 220 ventilator for the frontline surgical team of the 1st Separate Medical Battalion. There is a separate video that our combat medics recorded addressing us. Please take a look at it.
Апарат штучної вентиляції легень – незамінна річ для надання невідкладної допомоги в умовах бойових дій. Ми в 1-му окремому медичному батальйоні використовуємо спеціальні портативні системи забезпечення для використання у військових умовах. Це найкращий інструмент, але, на жаль, він не призначений для такого навантаження та роботи в безперебійному режимі, яка є в наших умовах зараз. Тому ці системи починають виходити з ладу. Через це ми потребуємо додаткових звичайних стаціонарних апаратів ШВЛ. Залишитися без них не можна, адже це призведе до серйозних наслідків. Вартість одного апарату – 730 тисяч гривень, а всього потреба є у 8. Разом з каналом Бориса Тізенгаузена оголошено збір на 2 апарати ШВЛ для передових хірургічних груп 1-го окремого медичного батальйону. Часу обмаль. Розраховуємо на вашу підтримку.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Combat medics are simply guardian angels. That is, they risk their own lives to save the lives of our defenders. So in this case, your donation directly saves the lives of Ukraine's defenders. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There's private, there's mono, and there's PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. To each and every one of you, I say a huge thank you. From myself, from our medics, and from those whose lives they are saving right now. Let's help them save lives. If you don't see the payment details here, there's also a QR code you can use to donate. And by the way, the guys have arranged this. Volodya from the 1st Medical Battalion wrote to me about it. So they made an agreement with the supplier that if they pay for 2 devices, they'll be given 8 on credit. They'll pay off the rest later, but at least they'll be able to get all 8 right away and meet this urgent need. That's really good news. Yesterday, I delivered drones for the legendary Azov unit, for which we also completed the fundraising together with you. Thank you so much for that as well. Thank you. So take a look at how it happened. These are the amazing DJI Matrice 4 Tango drones. They're for the snipers from Azov's 1st Corps. These are very, very serious guys. I talked to them and they said that those ground evacuation vehicles, which we also recently finished fundraising for together, and the mall for the 1st Medical Battalion and the termites for the 101st Brigade, they said these are simply unmanned ground evacuation vehicles. Right now, they're worth their weight in gold at the front. In other words, they're a real lifesaver. And a special thank you for the drones. Believe me, in the hands of the sniper squad from the 1st Azov Corps, these drones will work wonders. And there won't be much room left for the scum who came to our land. A bit more from Donald Trump's statements. Putin really wants to do business with the United States. He wants to make a lot of money for Russia. I think we'll bring this war to a conclusion in just a couple of months, in his opinion, said Donald Trump. Well, okay, I won't comment on the couple of months part. Trump also said that he is not currently considering supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Let's clarify things a bit, or rather, let's make it clear. Putin doesn't want to make money for Russia. He wants to make this money, as he always has, for his trusted inner circle, which is called Cooperative or Zero Plus. That is, all these Rotenbergs, Kovalchuks, Timchenkos, and others. And regarding the idea that Putin wants to make money, will do great business with him, everything will be just super duper. Letting Putin kill thousands of innocent people, including the elderly and children in Ukraine, destroy entire cities, occupy the territory of another sovereign state, and then calmly saying, yes, we'll do business with him like that, and we'll let him make a lot of money. We have excellent conditions. Putin's hands aren't just up to the elbows in blood, they're up to his shoulders. He's covered in blood. And then just turn a blind eye to it and do business with him. To the fact that he kidnapped, stole 20,000 Ukrainian children. For that, he received an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court. How does any of this even align with the core values of the United States? Maybe it's necessary to reread the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution more often. Let's look at the Declaration of Independence. This is the moral and philosophical foundation of the American nation, a key passage from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The cowardly, despicable Kremlin moth decided it could take away life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from an entire independent sovereign country. And now, the main question, as they say, of our quiz. Donald Trump stated that Putin really wants to do business with the US to make a lot of money. Let's imagine that the US starts doing business with Putin, and Putin once again makes a lot of money. Question. By the way, you can answer it in the comments, and that would be correct and welcome. When Putin makes a lot of money, what will he spend it on? Will it be for the well-being of Russians? Will he build new cities, roads, hospitals, things he hasn't done in 25 years, I remind you? Or will it be for new weapons and a new war? How do you think? So why then let him earn lots and lots of money? By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because one Putin fan accidentally subscribed to this channel. And the next morning he had an epiphany. What is it? Putin has done nothing for Russians for a quarter of a century, and he will not do anything in the future. Just think how crazy you have to be and how much you have to hate your own people to, with a territory of more than 17 million square kilometers, almost twice the size of the United States, kill more than 1 million Russians for tiny. Here is a piece of scorched earth of a foreign state. Do you know how much undeveloped land, specifically dry land, there is in Russia? About 8 million square kilometers. That's almost half of Russia's territory, a little less than China or Canada. Can you imagine? And yet they keep trying, like, let us gnaw off someone else's land, drag it away with their black claws. Well, for now, Donald Trump has held back the tomahawks, although by now, probably, Putin would already be sitting at the negotiating table. If just one, if each of the 30 Russian oil refineries, important key ones, got hit by a single tomahawk each, well, what then? Go carry oil by the bucket to Rosneft. So, while Donald Trump is still thinking, Britain has delivered an additional batch of Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. Bloomberg reports this. I checked today, double-checked, but the quantity hasn't been specified yet. But the fact is, Ukraine will be able to use them effectively. Let me remind you, the range is 250 kilometers, enough to reach a significant number of Russian weapons depots and important military factories, not to mention oil refineries. Recently, literally on October 22nd, there was a strike on the Bryansk chemical plant, specifically with Storm Shadow missiles. They easily got through the Russian air defense system, and it was a very, very successful strike. This Bryansk chemical plant, the strike, well, it's clear that the power of the strike was incomparable. If it had been drones, the missiles hit, destroyed entire sections, and covered the target very effectively. At this Bryansk chemical plant, they produced gunpowder, explosives, and components for rocket fuel. That is specifically for the rocket munitions that Russia uses to shell Ukraine. So there was still plenty inside to burn and explode. And wow, it was quite a sight, just the way you like it. I'll remind you every time. To our Western partners, that NATO countries now have a truly unique opportunity to use their weapons, but with someone else's hands, to destroy or at least significantly weaken the Russian military-industrial complex and directly influence the situation. The more missiles that are now launched at Russian factories, this is exactly what gives a bigger and bigger delay to the moment when Putin suddenly decides that he needs to attack NATO countries. And believe me, he's already lost his mind. A bit later, when his whole skull is completely filled with Botox, and there won't even be room for that monkey, you know, the one that bangs cymbals together, then that's it. He'll be completely out of his mind. Right now, his gaze is already unhinged. So, NATO countries, the more missiles and drones, especially long-range ones, you send to Ukraine right now, the later Putin will come to you with war. That's a fact. That's an axiom. And the more time NATO countries themselves will have to prepare for when Putin does show up, to stack those burnt bricks again, to try to recreate factories, equipment, to try to look for something somewhere, so you'll have much more time to prepare. And now, our regular segment about the 1.5 meter tall enthusiast, who, with his 5-centimeter heels, has outplayed everyone again. The largest oil refineries in Turkey have increased their purchases. Of non-Russian origin oil. After the introduction of new Western sanctions against Russia, Reuters reports this. For example, the Sakar plant is Turkish, and Sakar is an Azerbaijani company. This plant in Turkey is now starting to purchase 4 shipments from Iraq, Kazakhstan, and other countries instead of Russia. Another major Turkish player, Tupras, is also increasing its purchases. This oil is also not connected to Russia, and they are preparing to remove Russian oil from one of their plants in China. Major state-owned oil refining companies such as Sinopec and PetroChina have started to reduce their purchases of Russian oil ahead of the new sanctions. So these actions could have an impact, and already, probably about 45% of Russian oil exports to China, that is, almost half of the oil that Russia sells, may have to be replaced. And as for Lukoil, I won't even start talking about it. They're urgently trying to offload assets in Europe. And I found out, you know who else could help Ukraine, especially with long-range weapons? This thought occurred to me. This news, the profits of Western oil companies have jumped by dozens of % after the strikes on Russian refineries and the tightening of sanctions, the strikes by our Ukrainian drones on Russian refineries. Western companies' profits rose by 61% in the third quarter compared to the previous quarter. Russian refining capacities are being taken offline accordingly. Someone has to replace them. Reuters reports on this. These strikes led to the fact that in September, the average daily export of petroleum products from Russia dropped by as much as 1,000 barrels. That's an absolutely insane number. So who do we have here? Naturally, it was American companies ExxonMobil and Chevron, British Shell, and French Total Energies that increased their profits. These are the companies that clearly benefited. For example, ExxonMobil's energy products division saw its profits increase by more than 30% quarter over quarter. So, in general, I have an interesting idea. Ukrainian drone strikes on Russian oil refineries are clearly increasing the profits of Western companies. There's a direct correlation. Do you see what I'm getting at? It's a brilliant business model that benefits the entire civilized world. Western oil giants spend part of their profits on buying drones and, of course, lobbying, and on securing supplies of other long-range weapons from their governments. Maybe they'll get something even more powerful. Ukraine is simply wrecking Russian oil refineries, hitting Putin's military wallet, and at the same time solving both its own issues and the business demands of its Western partners. It's beneficial for all reasonable people. We could even, by the way, sign the missiles and drones as being from ExxonMobil to the Orenburg oil refinery. Off it goes. You know, there's an option now. For a donation in your name, they can sign a drone that's going to fly at the Russian occupiers. You can even choose the refinery, for example. Here you go. These are drones for the Saratov refinery or some other one. It's a wonderful, even brilliant idea. And then the ancient villain woke up, or rather came to, Dmitry Medvedev. After the weekend, he once again lashed out at the US and the West. And he didn't like it, you see, how much our Western partners are spending on support for Ukraine, and he compares these expenses to the amounts the US spent in Afghanistan. He clearly decided to hit a sore spot. I'm quoting. And on the other hand, the indestructibly free Pindistan, sorry, that's a direct quote, that's what he calls it. The United States from 2001 to 2021 burned through $2.3 trillion in Afghanistan. In order to transfer power from the Taliban to the Taliban, what was the point of that? My point is, the more the Western world spends its resources supporting Ukraine, the more terrible it will be. The end of the story for the regime of the bloody Kiev clowns. And the larger the amount, the greater the size of the territory that will eventually return to Russia. And everything will happen just like it did for the US in Afghanistan. There will be a return of our citizens and Russian authority to originally Russian lands. And then he wrote, Happy upcoming Russian Unity Day. Regarding the return of our citizens, your citizens, just look at how the Kharkiv region is fighting now. Yes, all the regions where the Russian occupier is holed up right now. Look at how they were greeted. Russians here were met with Molotov cocktails and weapons. You see, the louder Medvedev crows, the worse things are going at the front. And by the way, Medvedev also forgets to mention how much the Soviet Union spent on Afghanistan and what was achieved by that lost war. But we understand that this is just the struggle of Putin's fighting chipmunk, just like his master. They only like certain fragments of history, the ones that talk about Russia's greatness or the failures of the hated West. In general, this dictator, by the way, a dictator from AliExpress, he provokes some mixed feelings with his threats. You know, in provincial youth theaters, plays can run for years or even decades. The same repertoire over and over again. And Medvedev is just like that hard-drinking bandit from a children's play waving a wooden saber. That is, he has 2 or 3 lines, and he's supposed to scare the youngest audience members with them, because the older ones aren't really afraid anymore. And then in the theater's buffet, this bandit, still in his makeup, after his 5th shot of vodka, of that strong 3-star or maybe even 1-star cognac, chasing it with a little sandwich topped with some dried out sausage. And the buffet ladies often complain that he simply can't keep playing the same grotesque villain for 20 long years, that he truly deserves more, and that once, about 15 years ago, he even played the Tsar himself, when the actor for that important role fell ill and was unable to perform. That's who Medvedev reminds me of. Well, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, and let's support our combat medics, our guardian angels. The link for donations is in the description of this video. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.